So what I would like to do next is to invite three panelists. They are also working on innovating. Now, there are probably in organizations that are what I call grown-up organizations. And so they're going to share the story with us, and then we're going to have a discussion to put all these stories in perspective. So let me invite Armel, Nicolas, and Masami to the stage. Thank you. So, Armel, the floor is yours.
Okay. So first, I'll tell briefly about me. I came to Japan in my early 20s. I came in lieu of my military service at the time, and I was working in a French electronics company doing R&D. And actually, at the time, we were following very closely the Walkman. That was one of my jobs. And after that, I went to INSEAD under the recommendation of Henri-Claude de Bétigny. Actually, I had a dinner with him before choosing, and he thought he was and he was very convincing in saying there is a real future in the relationship between Europe and Asia. And it was interesting to see him after almost 30 years yesterday. After INSEAD, I thought I would be coming back to Japan. It was the time of the bubble, but actually no chance. Outside of INSEAD, I had 9 job offers in Italy and 0 in Japan, so I went to Italy and worked for an industrial group there and started working on turnaround projects. The company took over 13 companies in 3 years, and I was assigned on many of these projects. And then carried on, and then left them and took over a company by myself with a private equity fund in France, which was again a turnaround project. After that, sold it to again an Italian company, and then went to the US, worked on consulting projects, on turnaround projects again. And then 10 years ago, I was out of the blue called by a headhunter to come and manage a Japanese listed company in retail with about 5,000 employees worldwide, a leader in its sector in Japan, leader in China, leader basically in Asia. It was not really a turnaround project because the company was very wealthy, but it had some kind of a systems turnaround and I would say culture turnaround to be done. After that, I joined briefly an American turnaround fund here in Japan, and when the Lehman shock came, I thought that it was maybe time to use all these 20 years of trying to fix old businesses in trying to do it from scratch, and if there were mistakes, it would be my own mistakes from the start. So I looked around and decided to what was happening in Europe, what was happening in the States, and I found a business model which was the flash sales business model that I had started in France earlier, and thought of starting it here in Japan. The business model is very simple. You raise a community of members. You go to fashion brands, mostly fashion brands, and these fashion brands have I would say inventory problems, or they want to accelerate their product cycle, and you propose these products for a very short period of time at a discount. So it's a win-win. The brands get their product out of their shelves, out of their warehouses. They get cash right away. The consumers get a great brand, a product they love at half the price in general, and we in the middle get a little profit as well. So it was really a win-win-win model. I had the luck of starting, she's here today, I will mention her, Maki Koishiwatari, so let's just give a hand to her. And we started as a 2 INSEAD here, so it's another example of INSEAD startups. What is easy about that business and what is difficult? I will try to make it short. Japan is actually the most retailed country in the world, most densely retailed country in the world. So actually, if you try to go online, e-commerce doesn't have a really compelling advantage. Everybody is, I think 70% of the population is within 40 minutes of Vuitton store here in Japan. You have shops opened every day of the week, late at night. You have shopping at every train station. You can find whatever you want in convenience stores that are open 24/7. So e-commerce definitely needs to have a different proposition than in the US, where you're far away from everything, or in Europe, where everything is closed at all times. So you really need to fight find another benefit. In starting the company as well, I thought it was just a startup, right? But actually, we had to start the buying office of a department store. We had to start raising a community. I'm not like Facebook, but almost. I wish we could have a community like Facebook. And then we have to have a logistics systems like Amazon. And then we have to have an IT system that is also quite a challenge. And in terms of talent and people to make it, to link back on what we said earlier, the difficulty is the fashion industry people and the IT people are as far as you can imagine in Japan. They do not communicate. As said earlier, the IT people only wear a t-shirt and jeans. The fashion people will never wear a jeans and t-shirt. And the fashion people, if they type with 2 fingers, it's already very good. So the biggest challenge was not hiring these people, finding them and motivating them on the idea. The biggest challenge was having them work together, communicate together, even though they were all Japanese. I would just say a note on the company. We mentioned women. This is a company with 75% women. About 30% of them can work part-time or with flexible time. 20% of the women in the company in the last 5 years have had children, which is also, I think I should get an award from the government, Japanese government, for that. So we are actually, in terms of culture, a very flexible and women-oriented company.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you. I'm sorry I spoke too much.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you very much. And I guess part of you mentioned many puzzles, and we'll come back to this. But one puzzle to think about is what is it for the end user that is unique in that platform? No. Let's do that later. But I think let's do that. Yes, but I think that's actually very interesting. I mean, there is an internal challenge, which is building that culture of fashion and IT, but also a challenge for the end user. Now let's hear about L'Occitane, Nicolas.
Well, thank you very much, Manuel. Can you hear me now? Yes. So normally I wasn't really supposed to prepare some slides, but since I came all the way from São Paulo, I was allowed. It's very short. I want to talk to you about the Groupe L'Occitane. The Groupe L'Occitane, obviously, everyone knows L'Occitane Provence, but we have 4 emerging brands. And I had the great honor to be in charge of this new one there, L'Occitane au Brésil. Before I enter in more details about L'Occitane au Brésil, I'd like to tell you something about what this company stands for. This company stands for to preserve and transmit. What is it to do with innovation, you will say? Well, actually a lot, because we are a company with a purpose, but we only survived because we innovated. We sell terroir around the world. But in 1995, the company had 10 shops, was turning over 10 million euros and losing 2 million. So the first thing we did is actually we went abroad and we sold the Provence terroir outside of France. And believe it or not, it sold much better outside of France than in France. What is really interesting though is, and to make a little link, the country where we're most successful at doing that is actually Japan. And today, one of the reasons why I can present L'Occitane au Brésil initiative and tell you about what we did is thanks to the cash we made in Japan. So now, this is the region we're selling. How do we go from Provence to Brazil? What is the link? Well, at first I'm going to do the marketing thing. You know, oh, we both have beautiful nature. There's a tradition for natural ingredients, traditions for agriculture and craftsmanship, and passion for people. And the Brazilians and the people from south of France, they hug each other, they kiss each other. And that is a very nice way of putting it. Having said that, there's also another reality which is to do with innovation. When you are in Brazil, which is used to be the second now with the devaluation of the reais, is about the 4th largest cosmetic market in the world, you have a glass ceiling if you don't produce locally, because it's a very protective market. So you have to produce locally if you want to escape some of the tariffs that are imposed on your products. Apart from the fact that depending on the exchange rate is something that's very, very anxious. I think you're very stressed about it, because on top of this, 150% of tariffs is on your COG. So when you increase the exchange rate by 20-30%, then goes your margin. So then you say, oh, well, let's produce L'Occitane en Provence in Brazil. Well, we sell Provence, really. So producing there is a bit complicated. And then we said, well, hang on, Brazil, largest biodiversity in the world. So why don't we produce something Brazilian in Brazil? I mean, it's pretty obvious. So we created this brand, L'Occitane au Brésil, a French soul with a Brazilian heart. The thing about this brand, and it's very important, is that we really wanted to explore the whole of Brazil.
Viver no Nordeste é uma contribuição para quem acreditou e teve fé no sertão brasileiro. Viver aqui, viver no meio da caatinga, não é ser animal, não é ser bicho, e sim é ser vaidoso. O Mandacaru está oferecendo esses produtos, uma proposta de recomendação, e dizer assim, eu estou aqui e posso servir também de beleza, eu também sou a beleza.
Quem imaginaria um dia que um produto nosso da região aqui servia para fazer produtos de beleza, um creme para fora, todo mundo poder utilizar um desses produtos, né?
Moderno essa relação de uma marca francesa estabelecer um diálogo com a cultura brasileira através dos seus designs.
Desenhar uma planta tão linda, tão grande, tão cheia de vida como a bromélia é mostrar um pouco do Brasil de uma forma colorida, alegre, sensível, que vem junto com perfume. Então é um trabalho especial.
So anyway, this is this brand. We really wanted to celebrate the whole of Brazil. We divided Brazil in 6 regions, biomass, and we selected an ingredient for each region. we ask an artist to illustrate on the actual packaging the local culture, because Brazil is a continent and it has a lot of diversity. And then and that was very important. We had to make this brand evolve because this brand, it's about Brazilianness. A brand is about emotional connections. And then we said, so hang on, it has the same name, L'Occitane en Provence, L'Occitane au Brésil. But what is the common and what is unique? And we said, so the heritage about L'Occitane en Provence is the poetic side is obviously how delicate the products are designed and everything. But then what's so specific about Brazil is the joy. When you live in Brazil, people smile at you just because you live in Brazil. Because people love Brazilians. We also are very spontaneous in South America, and we're plural. And this diversity is really a way to try every time to differentiate our brand. You know, I'm not showing too many products. Each one of you in your bag, you have a little product, a little gift, hand cream that I gave to you. I hope you're going to enjoy it and appreciate it. But more importantly, we managed to create a brand that bears the same name, but is different. And we made it evolved, and I have just a last little video to show you.
É o olhar, sabe? Penetrante, assim, sabe? Tipo, você não consegue tirar o olho da pessoa, assim, começa a ver, tá, tipo...
A mulher feminina, ela é tipo uma rosa bem cheirosa, sabe? Pra primeiro você ter uma beleza, você tem que manter essa beleza por dentro.
Que a beleza tá no que a gente sente. Acho que tá no coração.
L'Occitane au Brasil. A beleza além da beleza.
And so this is it. We have now launched 150 products in 2 years. We're going to launch 50 products every year for the next 2 or 3 years. It's been hectic, it's been difficult. I'm here in Japan also as the most successful country for L'Occitane en Provence to try and find what was done well here and that we could apply to make it success, this new brand, this Brazilian brand in Brazil. It's not obvious, it's not black or white. What is good best practice to take there and not, because they're two complete different countries. But it's a fantastic journey. It's, I guess, a bit different, and I hope that you've enjoyed it.
Very good. Very good. Keep that. Well, that's fantastic. So from Japan to Brazil, from Brazil back to Japan, and I think something that is also a theme that starts to emerge is competition, right? And so how can you sort of like compete in e-commerce and with retailers in a new country with the big cosmetics brands, and or even with established companies that are providing transportation solutions. So to hear more about that and to hear how you can actually innovate, it's not a startup company anymore. It's a grown-up company, Uber. And Masami. Very good. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Masami Takahashi. First of all, I'd like to say it's a real privilege to be on stage talking to my classmates and alumni from INSEAD. So a little bit of me. Before INSEAD, I was at Sony for a long time, so I have a lot to say about how innovation is and isn't being fostered in big companies. After INSEAD, I moved to San Francisco, and I was there working for Sony, more working on corporate development deals. And then I met Uber. I met Uber as a user, and I took Uber in San Francisco, and then I got pinged by Uber, and I had the opportunity to come back to Japan last summer to run Uber here. So I can talk about Uber as a company and how innovation is fostered there, but I think for the intents and purposes of this panel, I'll talk about my experiences in Japan. So in Japan, oftentimes Uber, as well as some of the other big services from abroad, when they come to Japan, we are labeled as the black ship. Now, the black ship is, some of you might know, is when Commodore Perry came to Japan back in the 1800s and told Japan to open up, and he came in these really black ships, big black ships. So people, when they came, were frightened, but they're also curious. So it's kind of a fine balance of those two. So to comments when people, when people call Uber the black ship, to that I say, no, we're not a black ship, but we have black cars. So I think but it's really important to present the value that we are trying to offer and to provide to Japan in a way that is digestible and understandable, because I think there is a sense in Japan when something is not tangible or something is very new, when it's not an incremental change from what they're used to, they get very scared. So one example is the sharing economy. You probably have used services like Uber and Airbnb around the world. It is taking the world by storm, but it is something that's still very nascent in Japan. So when I talk about the sharing economy, when I don't want them to think of it as something very new. So the sharing economy, actually, if you break it down, is really about community and individuals offering their resources to other individuals. And Japan, culturally and historically, has done that for a long time. Whether it be, they used to have these townhouses called Nagaya, in the Edo era, and people used to, provide soy sauce for their neighbors and get vegetables in return. And so culturally, it's something that has existed. So I try to break it down and into something that they're comfortable seeing or visualizing, so that it's not scary. One other tendency that I see in Japan is that people like to put things in buckets. So when Uber came, what is Uber, right? It's an IT company out of the valley, but what is Uber? Is it a taxi company? No, it's not a taxi company because we don't have cars. So what is it? So what we ended up having to do, and this is a very lengthy process to figure this out, Uber in Japan is registered as a travel agency. So this is actually so we're in 64 countries, 350 cities now. I think it's the only city or country where we are registered as a travel agency. So it's that process took a long time. So the name of the game here is really about creativity. So you really have to get creative with your interpretations of different things, and patience and resilience, and really not just about just standing up for what you stand for and what you want to do, but also about really, I guess. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. The important thing here is really to get people to understand it in such a way, or get them to use and see the product, because otherwise it doesn't fit in any of these buckets. So one example of trying to get people to understand what the sharing economy is we don't have a low cost. People, you might have heard of UberX in the US or Uber Pop in Europe. We don't have those peer-to-peer services in Japan yet, but what we can do, because of very strict regulations around that, what an idea that we came up with to kind of manifest the thoughts of the sharing economy is we did a one-day stunt called Uber Recycle, where we got individual drivers, so just volunteer drivers, to say, I want to be a driver for the day. And we drove around, and so individuals became Uber drivers for the day. I did it myself. I took my parents' car and drove around as an Uber driver. And we went to pick up used clothing that people didn't want. So that in and of itself is really sharing. You're sharing your car. I was sharing my parents' car and my time. I went to pick up people's clothes that they didn't need. And we contributed, we donated all that to the Tohoku region that was affected by the earthquake. So I think things like that, when the media picked up on it, they kind of got it, right? This isn't some scary animal that came out of nowhere. It is something that we do and we actually feel comfortable doing. So it's raising that awareness through action, which I feel is fairly important and effective. when trying to do something new here. I just also want to touch on one challenge that I see, and several people have mentioned this already, and it's about the people. And hiring has been a nightmare for me in this country. What I look for running a small startup in Japan are three things. I look for someone that's able to identify problems, solve problems, and execute. It's really that combination of those three things that really are necessary to take an idea, a random idea, and really go and execute that. A tendency I found is that people in Japan are good at the solving piece, and some are very good at the execution piece. But the first phase, the identification piece, has been a challenge for me. I think maybe perhaps due to the education system in Japan, people are used to being given problems. So they're given problems, they go ahead and solve it. So they're really good at the solving piece. But the identification piece of really digging into data to see where the roots of the problem is, and really identifying that, really having an acute sense of where that could be, has been a challenge for me. So through the interview process and the hiring process, that's something I really pay a lot of attention to, is to figure out if they can do that. Because if not, then we'll just have a lot of guys that that are waiting for problems, and that's not really how we roll at a startup like Uber.
Very good. Thank you. So now the challenge is, well, I mean, these are fantastic stories, and how can we elevate the discussion and to get some insights out of it? Nicolas, can I borrow the? And I'm gonna go back to some of the questions that we said. Well, let's see if we can address some of this. Now, something that is common about that, there are many common themes in these three stories that we just heard. One is about regulations, and how to deal with regulations, in particular when they are very strong, and in three different industries. The other one is about learning across regions. And I mean, Uber, coming from San Francisco, you are in many different places, and you are dealing with regulation, and very distinct regulations in many different places. How do you share the best practices, the do's and don'ts? Some things are very local, and some others perhaps can be generalized. So how do you share that? And then we can actually ask the same question for L'Occitane. You learned a lot from Japan, from Japan to transfer some of those lessons to Brazil. What is Japan learning from the effort in Brazil? And the same here. I mean, there was a lot of inspiration in France on this. So let's talk about that. I mean, the learning aspect across regions. Max. Yeah.
So in terms of regulations, as you might see on the news, there's a lot of, we get involved in that across the globe. And there are a lot of differences, right? In every country, there are different laws. In the US, every jurisdiction has a different law. But I think one thing that's in common across the world is that in most or all cases, these regulations that we're talking about were written decades ago, right? When we could not even imagine the smartphone or the internet or cloud computing, any of these things. None of these things existed. So these things aren't a lot of times applicable to our business. So that's why, again, I go back to the bucket thing. They try to bucket us, but we don't really fit in any of those buckets. So that's one thing that we are very, that we share across the globe. In terms of sharing best practices, it's a tricky one, right? Because we don't want to oversimplify laws and regulations too much, because oftentimes there is a history behind why that law is the way it is. So we're very careful when we talk about regulations. I get asked all the time, what's the situation in France? What's the situation in Spain, in the US, in these places? And I have a basic understanding, but I spend some time talking to our policy team and trying to understand it, because there is also interest from regulators in Japan, for example, to understand what the situation is in these other countries. And it's definitely a good starting point. But we actually, instead of referring to a specific country or a specific law, because again of the context around the law, we try to stay away from that as much as possible, and we have at least an idea of what a modern set of regulations look like or should look like. So we start there as a starting point. Obviously, to build that, we use those other references, but we don't specifically say, in this place we do this, and in this place you do this. So I want to cherry pick and do this, because I think that I think it takes away from the history behind the laws that exist around the world.
Nicolas, you want to share something about learning, transfer?
So what we really try to analyze is how do you make a brand so strong, and also quite a lot of the retail practice, the way you engage consumer, and this is something in Brazil. It's very important. This is why in the second film that I showed, we stopped being just about a nice cosmetic brand that puts together loads of different ingredients, which everyone is very specific actually and has very different and special efficacy for the product. But we try and build a connection, emotional connection with the brand, talking about the brasilidade, and really the brand evolved from a true story, because we tell true stories, to the story behind the product, a beleza além da beleza, the beauty beyond the beauty. And all these stories that we have, all the way you construct this brand. And this was a strong inspiration in Japan. Now, what can Japan learn from us in Brazil? Today, not much, but I hope that they're going to have one day the audacity to launch the Brazilian brand in Brazil, actually. And it's difficult because we know that today, being very simplistic, almost too simplistic, we have 3,000 points of sale, L'Occitane en Provence in the world, and we believe that L'Occitane en Provence and L'Occitane au Brésil, they have two very different brands nowadays. In Brazil, we have in 40 shopping malls the two shops, L'Occitane en Provence and L'Occitane Brésil, and both are growing. There is some cannibalization happening, but that's normal. But the pie is certainly bigger, and so for me is to be able to show to the Japanese that actually L'Occitane au Brésil is a way for them to grow even bigger, because they're very big here.
Very good. And now back to the e-commerce and competing. What is unique? From the end user perspective, when you were telling your story, I lived 10 years in France. Now I'm based in Singapore. But when we were in France, we became big fans of a site called Vin Privé. And as you were describing this, it was reminding me the experience of buying in Vin Privé. It was spectacular. It was very unique. And the business model has similarities with this. So I wonder, what is the user experience and how do you maintain that and to compete in retailing in Japan? Yeah.
So just to go on Vente Privée, yeah, I'm not going to hide that my very clear inspiration was Vente Privée. So it's very clear from the beginning.
I'm talking about transferring from France to Japan. Yep.
In a way, it's a transfer of idea, or transfer of concept or business model from Europe, from France to Japan. The main point about transferring a business model, let's say a business model from a country to the other, is you're going to say, well, I'm going to adapt it. Adapting it is nice, but it's not what makes the success. What makes the success is make sure it's being adopted. So not adapted, but be adopted. Mm-hmm. And the way to be adopted is, especially if you deal with an industry like the apparel industry, which is a very, I think, everywhere, but it's, well, not everywhere, but in Japan it's still a very, very traditional industry, is how to be adopted by these people. Just to give you an idea, when we deal with Japanese apparel brands, we receive products and samples. About 25% of the products do not even have a JAN code, a barcode. They are not referenced with a barcode. It's just an item here. And what we are doing is we are creating these kind of product information management systems about the whole industry. So it is, and the people in the apparel industry, do they understand the benefit? Not really in the beginning. So you need to explain to them to be adopted. And I'm going to branch on something, and startups usually is associated with young people, young innovative people. This startup actually started with old people. The average age of the buying team of the company is over 45 years old. Many of them, 3 of them are over 55. And that was the key to success. Because these people, especially in Japan, where you have a pretty layered or hierarchical society and where companies are quite organized, if you cannot deliver the concept to the top, you're going to have nice conversations. It's very interesting. And your young sales guy or young buyer is going to have the same meeting with the same company for 3 years, maybe. It's always going to, lots of atmosphere, but no deal. So if you really want to break it, is be adopted by your partners, and to be adopted, you need to have people who can talk to them at the right level, and that means not just young disruptors. That doesn't work. You need old disruptors.
And that's going back to...
So for the, sorry, I'm branching back to the benefit for the user is very clear. Japanese women love fashion, love brands. I think it's like many women in the world. We offer these great products directly from the brands to them, directly delivered to their house at a discount of sometimes 50%, 60%, 70%, sometimes 80%. So it's a great benefit. It's a very obvious benefit. So they have a benefit of price, they have a benefit of choice, and they have a benefit of discovery of brands.
And as you were mentioning, some of the things that the 3 of you stand by, and it becomes very strong that having values is critical. To be perseverant, I mean, persistence and standing behind your values, your value proposition, your brand is critical to overcome all these sort of challenges that you observe in terms of recruiting, in terms of dealing with regulations, in terms of differentiating from competition. And can you share a little bit about how much internal talk and discussion are about values, and sometimes they are referred to the brand, sometimes they are referred to the strategy mission, but how explicit that is, or is it just implicit that we suddenly sort of like gets into the DNA of the organization and lives with it and gets adapted with the new circumstances? Just share a little bit about values.
Right. So initially, at least globally, when Travis and Garrett founded Uber 6 years ago now, they weren't really values. They just went out and did their thing and thought it was cool, right? I think recently, as we've grown exponentially and really globally, and we have thousands of people working on this now, I think we've kind of come back to that and talk a lot about what we do. Because I think, we are in a very high-paced and sometimes, controversial arena. And when we lose sight of what we stand for and why we're doing what we're doing, I don't think we can continue. So we talk a lot about that. And what we talk about is we are here we celebrate cities. We make cities better. We provide better options for riders, and we create jobs for drivers. And for the overall city, we reduce congestion, reduce drunk driving, all these things that we feel are very positive to all the stakeholders in the city. And we celebrate that because I think just reiterating that over and over again just helps us understand and internalize why we do what we do. And oftentimes we go back to riders and drivers. So we get testimonials from drivers. And I always talk to my Uber drivers when I'm in the States. Why are you an Uber driver? And they all have their stories, It could be a single mom and who's going to school and just doing Uber for a few hours. It could be someone that's trying to build their business. I've had actors, I've had PhD students, I've had professors, you name it. There's just, people have different stories, and when you get reminded of those, that's something that really, that kind of, represents the values that we stand for. So part of it is, yes, we talk about it, and that is important to make that vocal. But I think on an individual basis, we all really, we believe in what we do, and we engage with drivers, and I think that's what keeps us all going in the company.
Very good. And Nicolas, you started your presentation with what L'Occitane stands for. How much of that is an internal discussion? How much do you revisit those values, and how critical it is, that type of discussion internally?
Well, I mean, what is clear is millennials will first look for a company with a purpose, and then also money. But I think we're reaching a generation where having a clear sense of community in the business is important, and people enter at L'Occitane, and we are. I didn't talk about all this, but actually we are extremely exigeant with the way we do our cosmetics. Having said that, we want to do the best cosmetic product possible. We don't want people to buy our products because we do some good. We want to do the best cosmetic product in the most constrained way for ourselves, in the most ethical way. And this is incredibly empowering. We basically developed many different chain of cultivating sustainable and profit-sharing ingredients in Provence and in Burkina Faso with L'Occitane Provence, and we've done this with 15 ingredients in Brazil, and we go back to the communities, and we exchange with the people. I mean, you've seen some of the producers in the video, and my favorite is the guy in the Caatinga, Alcides Peixinho, and this guy is genius. He's so passionate about his region. He looks at you and say, "I'm the beauty." I mean, and the guy looks 70 and burned by sun, but that kind of love of terroir, love of giving back to society and community is something that's incredibly empowering. And in fact, sometimes we don't even communicate that well to the consumer because we want to focus on the end product, not what we do.
Very good. Armel? Yeah. Yep.
Of course, I think we provide something very clear. These ladies who love fashion, and fashion has been on over and over forever, and especially in Japan. Fashion developed in everywhere you had seasons, fashion developed. You change season, you need to change clothes. So Japan has actually not 4 seasons, but you can divide it into 10 seasons. So that's why Japan became such a big market for fashion. So we do provide fashion at a much cheaper cost. And we do provide also the possibility for everybody to see much. We deal with 4,000 brands. So we give a chance to discover brands, to discover products that you wouldn't be able to discover going in a shopping mall. The other thing is, unlike most internet models or e-commerce models, we are not an active search model. So we are not, you don't need to go into Google and put a keyword and go in and narrow down to your search. We're a passive mode. So we're like a TV program where you log in every night at 9 o'clock and poof, you see a ton of new brands offering new products. So in a way that we are a reverse in e-commerce model. So this is the benefit for consumers. For the trade, we offer a great benefit because we dispose of their inventories, so they get cash quicker, we reduce waste, and we are an engine for innovation. The faster they get rid of their old product, the faster they can innovate. So this is where the value is, and I think everybody believes it.
You to set off stakeholders
we have stakeholders, and we need to take care of all of them at the same time.
Talking about stakeholders, and I would like, we have 1 or 2 minutes to wrap up, but I want to open the opportunity for people if they want to ask questions. I think there are a couple of microphones around for the audience, and there is a question over there, I believe. Yes.
Right. Taxi industry is one of the most politically strong industry in Japan. I have seen many taxi companies who try to lower the price and got blocked by existing, companies as well as ministries. So, how do you overcome that kind of? Uber is, I would say, disruptive technology. So I think overcoming existing incumbent companies and regulators who are actually helping these existing companies, I think that's one of the biggest challenges for Uber, especially in Japan. So I'd like to hear what's your strategy in kind of breaking through that regulation. Actually, and I actually wanted to ask the question to the last panel, Wethnab, I forgot his name, but the person who wanted to break into low-frill finance industry, asset management. I think banking, finance is one of the another example of a heavily regulated, protected industry. I'd like to hear, if he's present, I would also like to hear his opinion. How do you plan to break those, protective regulations?
So in the interest of, we can get the first part of that question here because Max is here, and I know you might have many other questions. We are going to be around. I mean, the coffee break is coming up very soon, so many of these questions can trigger tremendous conversation over coffee. But why don't we hear from Max from Bazaar?
Sure. So a great question.
Right.
Sounds like a media interview. I get asked this all the time. So I think one interesting thing to note is this concept of disruption, right? I think when people hear disruption in Japan, I think it's often people just think of we're here to destroy something, right? It's the Japanese translation is hakai, which is destroy, right? So it sounds like we're here to destroy something. Which is not at all the case. So our current model here is we are a travel agency, and we are partnering with existing taxi companies and limousine hire companies. And we're actually helping them increase their utilization, help them earn more money. We are in the business of providing more transportation options to riders, and also helping the drivers earn more money. So it's not that we need to destroy what's existing to make something new. What we're here to do is to grow the pie, the size of the pie, and there needs to be new kind of regulatory frameworks to allow for that. But I think that's an interesting or important concept to bear in mind, is that disruption doesn't mean destroying something that exists necessarily. I think there are plays to be made for existing players, whether it be providing a more premium tailored service, professionals, services that only professionals can make are going to be there, and there's going to be need for it. But I think it's not going to come for free for them as well. I think when such technologies come about, these disruptive technologies come about, I think there's work that we all need to do to improve the offerings that exist, because I think that's the only way that societies progress. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's important to note that concept.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
And I know we're sort of running out of time. Where is Narayan?
Yeah, we are running out of time.
We're running out of time. Yeah. So I think Narayan is here.
Yes.
Yes. Where is? I don't see.
Narayan is here.
Yes. And,
but it's okay.
It's okay. So I think what I would like to do, because
wrap up. Wrap up.
So
wrap up and 5-minute breaks.
We're going to go to a 5-minute break, and again, this a lot of the, hopefully this was a trigger, a catalyst, an innovation catalyst to trigger conversations around this topic, about innovation, about entrepreneurship, and in this region, and not only in this region, but also across the world. And the common thing here was the protagonists were all coming from you, from this community, from INSEAD. I want to thank the 3 young entrepreneurs who were here before, and for sharing their stories, and also for the panelists for also sharing the stories and having this discussion with all of us. Thank you. Good.